My neighbor hated cats. He threw poisoned food over my fence and killed my 17-year-old best friend. He did not know I already had a camera. I am a 32-year-old woman, and my life, for as long as I can remember, has been pretty much defined by cats. I work as a veterinary technician, a job where I see the best and worst of how people treat their animals. To balance out the darkness, I spend my weekends volunteering at a local stray cat rescue, a chaotic but wonderful place dedicated to trap-neuter return programs and finding homes for the endless stream of adoptable kittens. My own home is my sanctuary, a small house with a securely fenced-in backyard that I had professionally installed for one reason: to give my 3 cats a safe outdoor space. They were the undisputed rulers of my small kingdom. Or rather, they were. There was Luna, a sleek, jet-black cat with a penchant for mischief and a purr like a tiny motor. There was Finn, a goofy, clumsy orange tabby who was afraid of his own shadow but fiercely affectionate. And then there was Jasper. Jasper was my soulmate. He was a scruffy, one-eyed tuxedo cat who I had adopted from a shelter when I was a 15-year-old girl. He was 17 years old, ancient and majestic in cat years, and he had been with me through everything. He had seen me through my high school graduation, my first devastating heartbreak, my move to this very house. He was less of a pet and more of a furry, purring extension of my own heart. His one good eye held the wisdom of our shared history, a silent understanding that transcended species. He was the constant, steady presence in my often tumultuous life. The peace of our small sanctuary was shattered 6 months ago, when the house next door was sold. The new owner was a man in his late 60s named Mr. Henderson. He was a sour, solitary man who radiated a kind of bitter, simmering anger at the world. He never waved, never smiled, never made eye contact. He just moved about his yard with a permanent scowl etched onto his face. My first interaction with him was a bad omen. He was in his yard, and my goofy Finn had hopped onto the top of our 6-foot-tall shared privacy fence to sunbathe, as he often did. I saw Mr. Henderson look up at Finn with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He muttered something under his breath that I could not quite hear, then went into his shed and came back with a hose, spraying a hard, violent jet of water at Finn, knocking him off the fence and into my yard with a startled yowl. I ran outside immediately, my heart pounding with anger. I confronted him, telling him that my cat was not hurting anything, that he was on our shared fence. He just glared at me, his eyes cold and empty. He told me he hated cats. He called them vermin, disease-ridden pests that belonged in a sewer. He said I should keep my disgusting animals on my own property. I tried to explain that my yard was fenced and secure for this very reason, but he just turned his back on me and walked away, dismissing me completely. From that day on, he was a constant, menacing presence. I would see him staring at my cats through his window when they were in my yard. If they were near the fence, he would sometimes bang on it with a shovel to startle them. It was petty, cruel behavior, and it put me on a constant, low-level state of alert. I started keeping the cats inside more often, which they hated, but I never, in my darkest nightmares, imagined how far his hatred would actually go. Update 1. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of perfect, warm autumn day that feels like a gift. I had decided to let the cats out into the backyard for their supervised suntime. It was a ritual they loved. The yard was their safe kingdom, and I was their watchful queen. I was in the kitchen, preparing their dinner, watching them through the large window above the sink. The scene was idyllic. Luna, my little black panther, was stalking a grasshopper in the tall grass near the back of the yard. Finn, my sweet, anxious boy, was napping in a perfect patch of sunlight on the patio, his orange fur glowing. And Jasper, my old man, was slowly, majestically, making his way to his favorite spot under the old oak tree, his movements stiff with age but still filled with a quiet dignity. Everything was peaceful. Everything was normal. I smiled to myself, feeling a deep sense of contentment. I turned away from the window to take a phone call. It was from the rescue, an urgent situation about a litter of kittens found abandoned in a dumpster. I got lost in the conversation, coordinating with another volunteer, trying to arrange a pickup. The call took maybe 10 minutes, 15 at the most. When I hung up, I turned back to the window, and the idyllic scene had transformed into something out of a horror movie. Finn was on his side on the patio, his body convulsing in violent, unnatural seizures, his legs kicking spastically against the concrete. Luna was staggering in wild, uncoordinated circles, drooling a thick, foamy saliva that dripped from her mouth, and letting out a terrifying, high-pitched wail that sounded nothing like a cat. It was a sound of pure agony. I screamed. It was an involuntary, primal sound of terror. I threw the back door open and ran outside, my heart exploding in my chest. I scanned the yard frantically for Jasper. My eyes landed on the spot under the oak tree. He was not moving. He was just lying there, his breathing shallow and rapid, his one good eye wide with a look of pure, uncomprehending terror. I knew, with the sickening certainty that only a vet tech can have, what this was. It was poison. I did not even think. I acted on pure, trained adrenaline. I scooped up Jasper first, his old, frail body limp in my arms. He felt weightless. I ran back inside and gently placed him in a carrier lined with a soft blanket. I grabbed a second carrier and ran back out for Luna. She was still wailing, the sound tearing through me, but I managed to coax her into the box. Getting Finn was the hardest. He was still seizing, his body a rigid, jerking mess. I knew I could not get him into a carrier without hurting him or myself. I grabbed a thick laundry basket and a heavy towel, wrapping him as best I could to restrain his flailing limbs, and half-carried, half-dragged the basket to my car. The drive to the 24-hour emergency vet clinic where I worked was a 10-minute blur of absolute terror. The cats were making horrifying, guttural sounds in the back seat. I was sobbing so hard I could barely see the road, my hands shaking uncontrollably on the steering wheel. I kept saying Jasper's name over and over, my voice a broken prayer, begging him to hold on, begging him not to leave me. When I burst through the doors of the clinic, my colleagues saw the look of sheer terror on my face and the state of my animals, and sprang into action. There were no questions, no paperwork. They took the carriers and the laundry basket from me immediately and rushed them to the back, to the critical care unit. I was left alone in the waiting room, my hands and shirt stained with Luna's foamy drool, the sound of her cries still ringing in my ears. I collapsed into a hard plastic chair, my body trembling uncontrollably. All I could do was wait and pray, and try not to think about the cold, hateful eyes of the man who lived next door. Update 2. The next few hours were the longest and most excruciating of my entire life. I just sat in the cold, sterile waiting room, staring at a blank television screen on the wall, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and the distant, muffled sounds of animal distress. Every time the door to the treatment area opened, my head would snap up, my heart lurching with a painful mix of hope and dread. My boss, Dr. Evans, a man I had worked with and respected for years, would come out periodically to give me updates, his face grim and etched with a professional sympathy that somehow made it all feel worse. He told me they had induced vomiting and were pumping the cats' stomachs, a violent but necessary procedure to remove as much of the poison as possible. He said they were administering activated charcoal to absorb the toxins still in their systems and giving them heavy doses of intravenous fluids to fight the dehydration and try to flush their kidneys. The initial blood tests were bad. Catastrophically bad. Their kidney and liver values were dangerously elevated, a clear sign of systemic poisoning. He told me they were doing everything they could, but that the prognosis was guarded. He kept using that word, guarded. A clinical, detached word that meant they could die. He was especially worried about Jasper, given his advanced age and already fragile health. Around 3 a.m, after hours of agonizing silence, Dr. Evans came out and sat in the chair next to me. He did not say a word. He just sat there for a moment, and I knew. I knew from the way he would not meet my eyes. He put a gentle hand on my shoulder and told me that Jasper's old heart had given out on the table. He said they had tried to resuscitate him, had performed chest compressions, but his frail body was just too weak to fight the poison any longer. He told me he was so sorry. A sound escaped my throat, a raw, wounded noise I did not recognize as my own. My boy. My 17-year-old friend, the one constant in my life for more than half of it. He was gone. He had died in a cold, metal cage, surrounded by strangers, scared and in pain, because of a monster's irrational hatred. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. Dr. Evans told me that Luna and Finn were still fighting. They were stable for now, but they were not out of the woods. He said the next 24 hours would be critical. He then confirmed what I already knew in my gut. The lab results from the stomach contents had come back. The poison was ethylene glycol, the primary ingredient in antifreeze. He explained that it has a sweet taste that is notoriously attractive to cats and dogs, and it is a brutal, agonizing way to die, causing catastrophic kidney failure. Someone had intentionally fed my cats antifreeze. There was only one person on this planet it could have been. The grief I felt was a tidal wave, but as it began to recede, something else was left in its place on the shore. It was a cold, hard, and utterly ruthless rage. This was not an accident. This was a premeditated execution. And the man who had done it was sleeping peacefully in his bed, just a few yards away from where my best friend had taken his last, terrified breath. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and purple, I made a silent vow to Jasper's memory. I was not just going to grieve. I was going to get justice. I was going to burn Mr. Henderson's world to the ground. Update 3. I left the veterinary clinic as the sun was fully risen, stepping out into a world that felt gray and washed out. I carried Jasper's body home in a small cardboard box lined with his favorite blanket. The drive was a silent, tear-streaked nightmare. Every intersection, every red light felt like an eternity. When I walked into my house, the silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Jasper had a habit of greeting me at the door, his one good eye blinking slowly, a rumbling purr starting in his chest. But now, there was nothing. The house felt empty, hollowed out, a shell that had lost its soul. I buried him in the backyard, under the oak tree that had been his favorite spot, the place where I had found him. I wrapped his old, still body in the blanket, my tears falling onto the soft fleece. I dug into the cold, hard earth with a garden trowel until my hands were blistered and raw. It was a brutal, primal ACT of grief. Afterward, I sat on my back porch for an hour. just staring at the small mound of disturbed earth. The rage was building again, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I took the forensic report from Dr. Evans out of my pocket and I called the police. I reported the incident as a criminal act of animal cruelty. I was transferred around a few times before finally speaking to an officer who said he would send someone out. An hour later, a police cruiser pulled up. The officer who came to my door was a young man who looked bored and tired. He had a slow, indifferent way of moving that set my teeth on edge. I invited him in and laid it all out for him. I kept my voice calm and factual, relying on my professional training to get me through it. I told him about Mr. Henderson's previous aggression. I told him about the sudden, violent illness of all 3 cats. I showed him the veterinary report from Dr. Evans, clearly stating the cause of death and illness as ethylene glycol poisoning. The officer glanced at the report, his eyes skimming the medical jargon with a lack of interest that was infuriating. He sighed, a long, put-upon sound. He asked me if I had actually seen my neighbor poison the cats. I told him no. He asked if I had any proof, any evidence at all, that linked Mr. Henderson to the poisoning. I told him that he was the only person with the motive and the opportunity. The officer shook his head slowly. He told me that, unfortunately, a motive was not proof. He said it was a simple case of my word against his. He said that cats wander, even in fenced-in yards, and that they could have ingested the poison anywhere. I told him my fence was secure. I told him my cats did not leave my yard. He just shrugged, a gesture of complete apathy. He agreed to go next door and have a chat with Mr. Henderson, but his tone made it clear it was a mere formality. I watched through my front window as the officer walked across the lawn. Mr. Henderson came to the door. I saw him talking, his face a mask of polite concern, shaking his head, gesturing with his hands as if he were the most reasonable man in the world. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. The officer came back to my porch, his notebook already closed. He told me Mr. Henderson denied everything. He said Henderson claimed to like animals and was sad to hear about my cat. He even suggested that perhaps I had used some kind of pesticide in my own yard that the cats had gotten into. He was trying to turn it around on me, and the officer was buying it. He told me there was nothing more he could do. He said, without a witness or direct evidence, there was no case. He handed me a card with a case number on it and told me to call if I found anything else. Then he got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing on my porch, completely and utterly alone. The system had failed me. The law, which was supposed to protect the innocent, had shrugged its shoulders and walked away. I felt a profound, chilling sense of abandonment. But as I stood there, the flimsy card with a useless case number crumpled in my fist, my despair began to harden. It crystallized into a pure, diamond-hard resolve. If the police were not going to find the evidence, then I would. If the system would not provide justice, then I would build my own case. I was not just a grieving pet owner anymore. I was an investigator, and my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, had just become the sole focus of my entire existence. Update 4. 2 days later, Luna and Finn were finally stable enough to come home. But they were not the same cats who had left. They were ghosts. They were thin and weak, their fur dull. The poisoning had caused significant kidney damage, and they were now on a strict, lifelong regimen of prescription food and medication. The veterinary bills were already astronomical, but that did not matter. All that mattered was that they were alive. Their trauma, however, was more than just physical. They were terrified. Finn, my already anxious boy, now spent his entire day hidden under my bed, refusing to come out even for food. Luna, once so brave and curious, would flinch at any sudden noise. They refused to go near the back door, their safe kingdom, our yard, had become a place of horror in their minds. Their constant, silent fear was a daily, heartbreaking reminder of what had been done, and it fueled my mission. My investigation began that night. The police wanted evidence. I was going to get them an ocean of it. My first move was surveillance. I took a significant portion of my emergency savings and went online. I spent hours researching the best outdoor security cameras, wide-angle lenses, high-definition, color night vision, motion-activated recording. I bought 4 of them. The next day, I set them up. I waited until after midnight, when I knew Henderson would be asleep. I installed the first camera under the eave of my roof, aimed directly down, covering my entire backyard and patio. The second camera, a smaller, more discreet one, I camouflaged inside a fake birdhouse that I mounted on the oak tree. Its lens pointed directly at the 60-foot stretch of fence that separated our properties. The third went on the side of my house, watching the pathway. The fourth went on my front porch, watching him come and go. I linked them all to a secure hard drive in my office. From that moment on, every move he made outside his house was recorded. Next, I began a meticulous, painstaking search of my own yard, treating it like a crime scene. I put on gloves and divided the yard into a grid. I got down on my hands and knees and began to crawl, inch by inch, along the fence line. I was looking for anything out of place. After an hour of finding nothing but old leaves and twigs, I almost gave up. Then, underneath a dense bush right against the fence, I saw it. It was a small, shredded piece of something grayish-brown. It looked like a scrap of canned tuna, our cat wet food, now dry and crusted, and it was sitting in a small, dark, oily-looking puddle. My heart began to pound. I carefully took a sample of the substance and the surrounding soil, placing it in a sterile evidence bag I had brought home from the clinic. The next day, I took the bag to Dr. Evans. I told him my plan. I asked him if he could run a toxicology screen on the sample, off the books. He looked at me, saw the cold determination in my eyes, and he agreed without hesitation. He knew what I was doing, and he wanted justice as much as I did. While I waited for the results, I began the third phase of my investigation, canvassing. I started talking to my other neighbors, subtly at first. I did not mention the poisoning. I just mentioned that my cats had been sick and asked if they had noticed anything strange in the neighborhood. I began to hear stories. The woman who lived 2 doors down told me her small dog had become violently ill a month ago after digging near Henderson's fence. The vet had called it gastric distress. An elderly man across the street mentioned that several of the neighborhood's feral cats, the ones a few of us cared for, had simply vanished over the past few months. He had assumed they had just moved on. I started a new document on my computer. It was a timeline. I logged every conversation, every anecdote, every disappearance. A dark, sickening pattern was beginning to emerge. This was not just about me. This was not just about my cats. Mr. Henderson, the quiet, sour man next door, was a serial killer of animals. And I was going to be the one to prove it. Update 5. The week I waited for the toxicology results on the soil sample was an exercise in forced calm. I fell into a grim routine. My life became a tightly wound coil of responsibility and obsession. During the day, I was a veterinary technician, caring for other people's animals with a gentle professionalism that belied the volcano of rage simmering beneath my scrubs. My colleagues were wonderful, giving me space, covering my shifts when I needed to take Luna or Finn to the clinic for checkups. Their kidney values were slowly improving, but they were still skittish, frightened shadows of their former selves. At night, my real work began. I would come home, feed the cats, administer their medications, and then I would sit in my dimly lit office for hours. My eyes glued to the 4-panel split screen of my security camera feed. It was like watching the world's most boring, most menacing reality television show. I watched Mr. Henderson mow his lawn. I watched him take out his trash. I watched him get his mail. I was looking for anything, any deviation from his routine, any sign of his guilt. I kept a detailed log. At 7:30 a.m. he gets his newspaper. At 4:15 p.m. he waters his rose bushes. He never had visitors. He rarely left the house. He was a creature of rigid, predictable habit. But his predictability was part of his mask. The man who had so violently and chaotically destroyed my world was living a life of utter, mundane normalcy. The disconnect was maddening. I started to feel like I was going crazy, staring at hours of footage of a retired man doing yard work. But then I would look over at Finn, huddled in the corner of the room, or catch a glimpse of Luna flinching as I walked past, and the resolve would harden in me again. The breakthrough came 5 days into my surveillance. I was reviewing the motion-activated recordings from the previous night. It was late, around 2 a.m. The camera I had hidden in the birdhouse, the one pointed directly at the fence, had picked up movement. I watched the footage, my heart pounding. A small, dark shape was moving along the fence line on my side. It was one of the neighborhood feral cats, a scruffy black and white tomcat I recognized from our rescue's feeding stations. He was sniffing the ground near the bush where I had found the original sample, and then, on the other side of the fence, a light came on. It was Henderson's back porch light. The tomcat immediately froze, then bolted, disappearing into the darkness. Mr. Henderson did not come outside. The light just stayed on for a minute, an eerie yellow glare in the black and white night vision, and then it switched off. It was nothing. And yet, it was everything. It was a sign of his vigilance. His hatred did not sleep. He was watching. He was always watching. The next day, Dr. Evans called me. The results were in. The sample of crusted food and soil I had given him tested positive for ethylene glycol. It was the same poison that had killed Jasper. I now had a direct, physical link between the poison and the exact spot in my yard where the cats had gotten sick, a spot right against his fence. It was not a smoking gun, but it was ammunition. Armed with this new evidence, I expanded my neighborhood canvassing. I created a carefully worded flyer. It did not mention Henderson by name. It was a community awareness notice. It warned residents that there had been a confirmed case of animal poisoning in the area and listed the symptoms of antifreeze ingestion. I included my phone number and the police case number, asking anyone with information or whose pet had suffered similar symptoms to contact me. I spent my weekend walking the entire neighborhood, tacking the flyers to telephone poles and community mailboxes. The calls started coming in that same afternoon. It was like opening a floodgate. I heard from the woman whose dog had gotten sick. She said the symptoms on my flyer were a perfect match. I heard from 3 other people on my street whose cats had run away or disappeared in the last 6 months. One woman broke down on the phone, telling me her beloved 12-year-old cat had died of sudden kidney failure 2 months ago. The vet had said it was probably just old age. Now, she was not so sure. I documented every story, every date, every heartbreaking detail. I created a map of the neighborhood, placing a small red pin on every house that reported a sick or missing animal. The pins formed a terrifying cluster, a circle of death, with Mr. Henderson's house sitting squarely in the epicenter. I was no longer just investigating Jasper's death. I was uncovering a suburban massacre. Update 6. The next phase of my plan was a gamble. It was petty, it was provocative, and it was designed to rattle his cage. I needed him to make a mistake. I went to a print shop and had a small, professional-looking sign made. It was a simple white sign with bold black letters. It read, "This property is protected by 24-hour video surveillance." I mounted the sign on the fence, directly facing his house, right next to the bush where I had found the poison. It was a declaration of war. I wanted him to know I was watching him. I wanted him to feel the unease of being observed, the same unease he had inflicted on my cats. I watched the cameras the morning I put it up. I saw him come out to get his newspaper. He saw the sign. He stopped dead in his tracks and stared at it for a full minute, his face a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. My petty act had hit its mark. For the next week, he was a different person. His rigid routine was shattered. He was paranoid. I would see him on the cameras, peering out his windows, scanning my roof and yard, undoubtedly looking for the cameras. He stopped spending time in his yard. He seemed to be a prisoner in his own home, and I took a grim, vicious satisfaction in that. And then he made his mistake. It was the break I had been waiting for, the piece of evidence that would tie everything together. It was a little after 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I was in my office reviewing footage when I got a motion alert from the birdhouse camera. I switched to the live feed. My heart leapt into my throat. It was him, Mr. Henderson. He was in his own backyard, but he was acting shifty, cloaked in the darkness. He was wearing gloves. He was carrying a small bowl and a large, jug-like container. The camera's color night vision was so good I could read the label on the container. It was a gallon of Prestone antifreeze. I watched, my entire body rigid, as he poured a small amount of the brightly colored liquid into the bowl. Then he opened a can of what looked like cat food and mixed it into the antifreeze, creating a sickly, sweet-smelling porridge of death. He looked around, his eyes scanning the fence line, scanning my house. He could not see my cameras. He thought he was safe. And then he did it. He walked over to the fence, to the exact spot beneath the bush, and he carefully slid the small bowl underneath the fence, pushing it a few inches into my yard. He was laying a new trap. He was trying to finish the job to kill Luna and Finn. I did not scream. I did not move. I just sat there and watched, my finger hitting the record button to save the entire sequence to a separate, secure file. I had him. I had him dead to rights. I had him on high-definition video, wearing gloves, mixing a batch of poison, and placing it on my property. I had his motive. I had his method. I had his face. I let him finish. I watched him sneak back into his house and turn off the light. I waited another 10 minutes, my heart pounding to make sure he was gone. Then, I put on my own gloves, took a flashlight and an evidence bag, and went outside. I carefully retrieved the bowl, a small ceramic dish filled with the vomit-inducing mixture. I sealed it in the bag. I had the poison. And I had the poisoner. The next morning, I did not go to work. I took the day off. I gathered all my evidence. My detailed logs, the map of sick and missing neighborhood pets, the veterinary reports, the positive toxicology report from the first sample, the sealed bag containing the bowl of fresh poison, and the crown jewel. A USB drive containing the full, unedited, time-stamped video of Mr. Henderson's criminal act. I did not call the bored, apathetic officer who had given me his card. I went straight to the police station and asked to speak to a detective. I told the officer at the front desk that I had video evidence of a felony crime in progress. That got their attention. This time, I was not a hysterical pet owner. I was an investigator, and I was presenting an airtight case, and this time, they were going to listen. Update 7. I walked into the police station feeling like a different person. I was not the weeping, panicked victim who had been so easily dismissed a few weeks ago. I was cold. I was focused. I was armed with undeniable proof. I asked to speak with a detective, and when the desk sergeant started to give me a routine brush-off, I looked him dead in the eye and told him I had a time-stamped high-definition video of a felony crime in progress. That changed his tone. I was ushered into a small interview room, the same kind I had seen on 100 television shows. A few minutes later, a different detective walked in. She was a woman in her 50s with tired, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her name was Detective Valencia. I did not wait for her to ask questions. I laid my case out on the metal table between us. I started with the veterinary reports, highlighting the official cause of death. I showed her the timeline of neighborhood pets who had gotten sick or disappeared. I showed her the map with the cluster of red pins. I presented the toxicology report from the first soil sample. I placed the sealed evidence bag containing the poisoned bowl on the table, and then I took out the USB drive. I told her it contained a video recorded last night from a camera on my property. I watched her face as she plugged the drive into her laptop. I saw her professional mask of detachment slip as she watched the footage. I saw her eyes narrow. I saw her jaw tighten. She watched the entire clip, then rewound it and watched it again in silence. When it was over, she finally looked up at me. The apathy I had faced from the first officer was gone. Her eyes were hard as steel. She told me that what I had done, the meticulous gathering of evidence, was remarkable. She said I had handed her a conviction on a silver platter. She told me that felony animal cruelty was a serious charge, and that the premeditated nature of Henderson's actions, caught clearly on camera, made it one of the strongest cases she had seen. The rest of the day was a blur of formalities. I gave a long, detailed, recorded statement. I signed affidavits. I labeled and submitted each piece of my evidence. Detective Valencia told me they would be obtaining a search warrant for Mr. Henderson's property immediately. She said the arrest would likely happen that same afternoon. She asked me to go home and to not, under any circumstances, confront him. I drove home, my adrenaline finally fading, leaving me feeling empty and exhausted. I sat on my couch, watching the clock, every minute an eternity. And then, around 4 in the afternoon, I saw it. 2 police cruisers pulled up quietly in front of Mr. Henderson's house. I watched, my heart pounding, as Detective Valencia and 3 other officers walked up his driveway. I saw them knock on his door. I saw him answer, his face a mask of confused, indignant anger. I saw Valencia show him the warrant. His face collapsed. The arrogance, the hatred, it all just evaporated, replaced by a look of pure, pathetic fear. They were inside his house for over an hour. I watched as they brought out evidence bags. Later, Valencia told me what they had found. In his garage, they discovered multiple jugs of antifreeze and a shelf stocked with dozens of cans of the same cheap brand of cat food I had seen him mixing on the video. They found his gloves, and in his basement, they found something that made even the veteran detective sick. A small, gruesome collection of pet collars, some with little bells, tucked away in a shoebox. They were trophies. He was not just killing animals, he was memorializing his kills. Finally, they brought him out. He was in handcuffs. As they walked him to the cruiser, he looked across the lawn and he saw me, watching from my window. Our eyes met. In his, I saw no remorse. I saw only a look of shocked, hateful betrayal. He saw me as the villain of his story. I did not care. I just thought of Jasper, of his one good eye, and I felt a single, perfect tear roll down my cheek. It was a tear of grief, but it was also a tear of victory. The legal process was slow, but with my evidence, the outcome was never in doubt. Faced with the video, the forensic evidence, and the testimony of myself and 3 other neighbors whose pets had been affected, his lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. Mr. Henderson pleaded guilty to multiple counts of felony animal cruelty. The judge, a woman known for being a dog lover, made an example of him. She sentenced him to the maximum allowable sentence under state law, 2 years in prison. At the sentencing, the judge spoke directly to me. She thanked me for my tireless work, for doing the job the system had initially failed to do. She said that the community owed me a debt of gratitude. The news of his sentence spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. I became a local hero, the quiet vet tech who had taken down the neighborhood monster. People would stop me on the street to thank me, to share stories of their own beloved pets. The cluster of red pins on my map had become a community, united by a shared loss and a shared sense of justice. Life began to return to a new kind of normal. Luna and Finn slowly began to heal. The kidney damage was permanent, and they would require a lifetime of special care, but their spirits began to return. One day, I came home to find Finn actually sleeping on the couch, out in the open, for the first time since the poisoning. I sat on the floor next to him, not daring to touch him, and just cried with relief. A few weeks ago, I adopted a new cat from the rescue. He is a scruffy, one-eyed kitten who had been found in a drain pipe. Malnourished and scared, I named him Frankie. He is not a replacement for Jasper. No one could ever replace him. But he is a new chapter. He and Luna and Finn are slowly becoming a new family. Last weekend, I took the birdhouse camera down from the oak tree. I did not need it anymore. I went and sat by the small, unmarked stone I had placed over Jasper's grave. I told him all about it. I told him we got him. I told him the monster was in a cage. I told him that his legacy, his 17 years of quiet dignity and unconditional love, had sparked a fire in me that had brought justice to an entire community. His death was not in vain. It had meaning. And as I sit there, a warm breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree, I felt a sense of peace I had not felt in a very long time. The rage was finally gone, replaced by a grief that was no longer sharp and jagged, but soft and warm, like a well-worn blanket. It was the grief of a goodbye, but also the quiet, steady purr of justice served.